Welcome to the Debrief, Carolina Journal's weekly recap of major developments in North Carolina politics and public policy. I'm Mitch Kokai, sitting in this week for Donna King, and I'm joined once again by a great set of panelists for what's going to be a very interesting discussion. First of all, let's introduce on to my right a couple of folks from the John Locke Foundation. We have Teresa Opeka, who is the state government executive branch reporter for Carolina Journal, and Kelly Lester, who is a policy analyst at the John Locke Foundation's Center for Food, Power, and Life. And you'll find out that one of her focuses is on agriculture, coming up in just a bit. To my left, on the other orange couch, we have Anna Bevan Gravely, who is the executive director for the North Carolina Free Enterprise Foundation, NC Free. And we're joined for the first time by Bob Libicki, who is the director of the Center for Effective Education at the John Locke Foundation. Thanks to all of you for being with us. We're going to get to some traditional public policy issues in just a bit, but first, another tradition. A week from today, many of us will be joining with family and friends for a big Thanksgiving meal. And while there is some good news about the prices of Thanksgiving this year, it's not all good news if you put this year's numbers into context. Kelly, you've been focusing on this quite a bit. Tell us what's happening with Thanksgiving prices.
Yeah, of course. So the great news is that prices are going down this year compared to last year. But if we put up our little graphic here on the screen, I think we have one, you will see that the 2019 numbers, which would have been pre-COVID, have not returned, and that we are still seeing higher prices, about 25% higher than in 2019 for a Thanksgiving meal. Most of that decrease that we have seen, though, is only in one product. It can be in turkeys. Last year, there was a huge avian influenza that severely affected turkey prices, made them skyrocket. So Thanksgiving last year was quite expensive for the average consumer. So that is good news. In fact, turkey farmers have been able to raise production by about 2 to 3% this year to meet demand. So that's great. So not only did avian influenza went down, they were also able to produce more, which obviously brings prices down. We're going to see some other crops are going to have some lower prices, such as sweet potatoes. However, cost of things like rolls and stuff like that are going to be going up. The good news is inflation was only 0.3% for food items this last month, compared to 3.3% last year. However, altogether, inflation is still an issue. And the average consumer is seeing that at the grocery store, and they're definitely going to see that this Thanksgiving still, regardless.
Bonus points for remembering all those facts and figures. Teresa, sounds like a case of good news, but not as good a news as it could be for all of us who are having to pay for Thanksgiving items.
Right. I mean, if anybody goes to the grocery store, you come out and you go, "That's all I got, and look what my bill is." I mean, you're just seeing how it's increased so much, as Kelly mentioned. Like, it's not as in 2019 and even a couple of years before that. It really surprises you. And when you've got to make dinner for a big family, like they say, a lot of people are struggling, for around the holidays to actually have a Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas dinner upcoming. So it is quite a shock when you see that bill. It's good that the turkey prices have come down, but as she said, not everything has. So you kind of have to weigh, maybe you're not getting some extras to go along with your Thanksgiving dinner. Like maybe you're not going to get a pie this year, or ice cream, or other extras you normally get. But yeah, not as good news, but at least something's better than nothing, right? I guess you got to be thankful for that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and this could put a dent into spending on other things, because we also have holiday shopping coming up. If people are having to spend more on Thanksgiving, Anna Bevan, maybe they have less to spend for Christmas.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I've noticed is the Black Friday sales for all of the consumer goods, specifically J. Crew, Banana Republic, they're showing up in my inbox, are coming a little earlier. So I think that retail stores are catching on to the fact that inflation is a topic. It is impacting consumers in a whole bunch of different ways. And so they're trying to get ahead of some of the more expensive months of life, it seems. It really ends up being the end of October, November and December, certainly. Before, I would have said the summer, because you want to be outside, and those are all very social things. But I really think that the last quarter of the year has really taken over as being the most expensive time of the year.
Bob, it would be a shame if we couldn't eat all of the great Thanksgiving food that we want because the prices are too high.
Well, that's correct. You know, with regards to you know, all the prices for turkeys and tuition. I know we naturally go towards school stuff there, and you know, I'm sure now with just the completed legislative session, there were a lot of good things and bad things that came out of that.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that in just a bit. We're going to circle back to another topic, and then we'll get back to the legislative issues on education.
Mitch, if I can interject really quickly, there was a report. They said consumer spending was down quite a bit from October. People were already cutting back. So I think even though the Biden administration is saying, oh no, inflation's dropping, things are getting better, you're not really seeing that for the average person. In fact, they said next year's election is not going to be about certain, maybe what's going on now over in Israel and Gaza. It's going to be your pocketbook, what you're going to the grocery store, where you're buying your clothes, if you need to get them. That's what the election's really going to be about.
Yeah.
Teresa, that seems to be a pretty consistent thing. It seems every issue or every election is about your pocketbook. It's always going to be, what is your spending capacity? What can you get, and what are you getting for what you're spending? Right. And I think Thanksgiving is really bringing that into the forefront.
And the reality is that we keep, like you said, we keep getting told the economy's doing great, all these things are going to work themselves out. But when you just go talk to your neighbor, they're saying, well, I have the highest salary I've ever had in my life. I'm making the most money I've ever made in my life. Why do I feel so poor? Why do I feel like I can't afford necessities? I can't afford my bills. And it's I think food is one of the biggest issues with. I mean, last year alone, anywhere from 9 to 11% rise in food prices in just 1 year. It's great if it doesn't keep going up, but it doesn't matter if it's not going back down.
Right.
And if wages aren't going up in response, right?
So I was a little worried about the transition between Thanksgiving and politics, but we've already gotten into there. So let's go back to politics. And one of the things that we're seeing is December 4th is the official start date for candidate filing in North Carolina. But beforehand, we already know, Anna Bevan, about a number of crowded primaries. And I know that you've been looking into this. What are some of the things that are really standing out to you about these primary elections?
Yeah, I mean, no surprise, we have a really crowded primary on the Republican side, especially for lieutenant governor. And we also have some open congressional seats that are also pretty loaded. And so that is becoming more and more obvious. We're waiting for these candidates to fully file, but we have some popular names that we've seen before, but also a lot of Republicans who are trying to get these open seats. It seems to be a big Republican year with this shift in the maps.
Yeah, so you have the new congressional maps that are more favorable to Republicans, the new state House and state Senate maps, which also could be a little bit more favorable to Republicans, and a bunch of open seats on the Council of State that have attracted some people who might otherwise be running for other things. It seems like it's going to be a very, very interesting year in 2024, and a lot of people are trying to take advantage of that.
The field is going to clear out definitely after the primary, but that short season that we have from filing to our primary is going to be very, very loud, with lots of advertising, a lot of people who are trying to get their name out there and be a household name, possibly, if they could. And I think fundraising is a huge piece. We've talked about that before. The last time I was on, definitely we talked about the cost of per vote, but fundraising does not guarantee you a win, but it does allow you the opportunity to be able to tell your story. And when you're dealing with a really crowded primary, early money and being able to tell that story better and more efficiently is going to be really good for you.
Teresa, you get a lot of email in your inbox from these candidates and also the executive branch officials. Do you get the sense that people are really ramping it up, knowing that 2024 is coming about and trying to get their message out?
I do. I've been getting, quite a bit, and getting emails from the different campaign managers, campaign spokespeople, saying, hey, this one's spending, he's spending this much money, or they're doing this, or they're trying to get their name out ahead of, maybe some that aren't. And, not to disagree with Anna per se, but I think some people, like still running for governor in North Carolina, and Andy Wells, for instance. I don't really see anything about him running. You don't see any news coverage, any spending on commercials, and he is now in last place. So I think there is something to that. You've got to spend some money. There was a story out this week too that Bill Graham, who just got in the last couple of weeks, he's like rising in the polls. He's number 2 behind Mark Robinson, because he's at least spending $5 million of his own money. So it's kind of, like you say, you've got to get your name out there, as and unfortunately Andy Wells really isn't at this point, because or other candidates in general for any race. You've got to have to spend some money. But I am seeing a lot more emails to that effect.
All right, we're going to turn back now. We were starting to get into that. Now we'll get back to it, Bob. One of the things that's interesting about the legislative session is it appears to be done for the year. They have scheduled some times to come back in November or December if they have to, but they probably aren't, which means that it's a good time to take stock of what happened in education during this past legislative session. And Bob, we know you spend all of your time looking at what is happening in the education world. So what was the good and the bad of this year's legislative session?
There was, anybody who watches this knows that there's a lot that happens every session, which is 2 years long. And I'm just going to distill down what I think were the kind of the highlights. There were a lot of good things that happened, especially, I mean, if you are advocates of school choice, like John Locke Foundation is, and a lot of people in North Carolina, it was a very good year. As you know, the Opportunity Scholarship Program was expanded basically to a universal voucher. Charter schools, the authorization of charter schools and who authorizes them, that was changed to a Charter School Review Board. That may be in litigation for the next few months, et cetera. But that's an important step. And also, North Carolina also passed a Parents' Bill of Rights, which is significant legislation, really, that empowers parents to really take authority over their child's education. And that impacts a lot of things, but it gives parents real authority over, their records, their child's psychological records, medical records, et cetera. And that really strengthens the powers of parents in those areas. Now, with regards to, some of the numbers, a lot of people, a lot of progressives say, that conservatives are starving public education, that we're dismantling public education, all this. This is the 13th consecutive year that there have been increases for public education. This year we're spending approximately $11.2 billion just on K-12 education. It's an additional about $800 million over the biennium. So that's gone up. Teacher pay has gone up about 7% over the biennium. In addition to the teacher staff, most of the staff got an equivalent 7% over 2 years. Bus drivers got an additional 2% for that. And there have been also some good common sense legislation that came out. For example, with regards to, I think a lot of people were concerned about men participating on women's athletics teams. There was legislation that addressed that and prohibited that. There's also was legislation that prohibited gender transition surgery for young people. There were penalties put on that for physicians and medical personnel that try to do those things. With regards to some of the troubling areas, I would look mostly at things that have been around a long time. North Carolina, every year the issue that doesn't go away is teacher pay. And we paid, for the next biennium, it's about 7% pay increases for teachers. And staff raises are about the same for that. But we just kick the can down the road once again. The problem with the current salary schedule is that it's not tied. Pay is not tied to performance. It's tied to years in the classroom, and everybody knows that, and we have to address that. There are some efforts to do that now. The Pepsi Commission, which the teacher preparation commission that is currently meeting now and is trying to construct an alternative framework for teacher pay and alternative routes to higher teacher pay, the longer they remain in the profession. Those efforts, I think, might be helpful come long term. But the legislature, by and large, has punted on that issue, and it's a very important one. And we've written a lot on that effort, and I think in the long run, we're going to have to scrap this teacher schedule if we're really looking at long-term reform. Then again, the lottery is was developed in 2006 to get money in the classroom. This next year, they estimate about $935 million will be going to the public schools from the lottery. If you look at that, most of that money, unfortunately, does not get in the classroom. It goes to capital funding. It goes to pay non-instructional staff, scholarships, pre-K programs, transportation programs. There's ways to tighten that up. The lottery, unfortunately, has become a legislative cookie jar, and each year legislators decide who's going to get rewarded and where the money's going to go. And unfortunately, that's resulted in most of that money not staying in the classroom. But lastly, the most disturbing trend, I think, that's come out of this last session has been the prevalence of special appropriations and money that normally would come out of the general fund, but now is coming out of some of these reserve funds. For example, there's a regional economic development fund that now $75 million has come out of, and most of that money is going to local high schools for athletic programs, for putting in new grass turf on some athletic fields, new lights, and also to buy athletic equipment. Now, most of the people would object to that the state should be providing money for causes like that. And what that allows, why some of that transition is happening, is that it allows lawmakers basically to say it's not coming out of the general fund, so they can say they're holding the line on general fund spending. But we see that it's going out, and it's stuff that needs to be addressed, and really we need to bring the light of day on it to make sure it doesn't continue to happen.
Yeah. Anna Bevan, I know that the Free Enterprise Foundation, education has to be a top issue for a lot of the people that you're working with, and they are interested to see what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen more and more business leaders be really invested in solutions around education, whether it's the growth of the Opportunity Scholarship Grant to being universal. That is something that was very popular amongst the business community. And then there's still a huge cohort of business leaders who are really interested in providing the support needed for public schools to be able to continue to make public schools better and to thrive. And so that we're seeing that happen more and more within the business community of being interested, because education is a breeding ground for the workforce, whether it's lower school education or college or technical school. All of those are becoming more and more an attractive features for businesses when they move into the state.
And Mitch, if I may chime in here, I think it's really important for us to realize that you can fund both. You can fund both. You can be in favor of public schools and also be in favor of choice. That's always been our position, that we need to be committed to both options and realize, that we need both. We need strong public schools. We need strong private schools. But just because you support one doesn't mean you're not committed to the other.
Mm-hmm. Kelly, before you came to work for the Center for Food, Power, and Life, you used to work for the Cato Institute, which follows these issues on a national perspective. Do you get the sense from that time that North Carolina is in the forefront on some of these education things?
Oh, definitely, especially with the universality aspect, definitely for the Opportunity Scholarship is definitely at the forefront there. But yeah, another thing, going off of what Bob said earlier, that I think is just so funny with the argument that public school funding is getting taken away. It doesn't have to get taken away. It's per student, right? You can just entice the student to stay at public school if the public school's good and you're a good teacher. But if the public school isn't worth going to, the private school is better, why not go? You can't blame the kid for that. It's competition. It's the free market at work. And I agree with Bob that you don't have to support one over the other. It's not private or public. You can have both in this situation, and both are important, but they are going to be competitors. And that's an important incentive for teachers to be better, to do better, and for schools to create a better environment for children.
I think the challenge with that is for so long it's been, this is my team and this is my team, instead of the overall let's go sports. And I think that the leaning on the let's go sports is probably going to become more and more popular because, at least I would like to believe it would become more popular because, I mean, you said it exactly, competition is good. We should encourage competition because it'll make things better for the students specifically.
Okay, I'm going to go now to Teresa because you wrote a story this week, very interesting. Insurance Commissioner Mike Causey back in the news, but probably not for a reason he would really want to be. He had to backtrack on an earlier controversial decision. Tell us about it.
Sure. So yeah, he had to go back on a decision he made exactly 2 weeks to the date. It was on Halloween, actually. So he gave out some tricks that day, and not treats, to the top 3 fire officials in the state. He fired them. This was all based on something the state legislature did earlier with a Senate bill tied to the state budget, where they were going to reorganize and come up with a new framework for the state fire marshal. That role was a dual role with the insurance commissioner since the 1940s, so that's been around for quite a bit. And what was happening with the state budget and the Senate bill is that took away that from the fire or insurance commissioner, which didn't leave Mike Causey too happy with that. So as soon as that he got word of that, he mulled it over a little bit, and then he fired the top 3 fire officials. And from what he talked to us at Carolina Journal in September when the budget was passed, and also earlier this month, he thinks it was done in retaliation, first for him standing up against the Blue Cross Blue Shield bill, where they had, and also I think it was with Cigna Insurance too, where they're going to have their own independent. It was the depository. It was a bill that also passed. He stood up against that, but also too, he told us earlier this month that some of his staff, he had evidence that they were planning against him with this bill. There were specifics in this bill that actually protected certain roles, certain people, if you will. They weren't named, but he said he did have that evidence. So that's why he said he went ahead and did what he did. But as soon as Governor Cooper signed that bill into law, he had to go back and reinstate them because it would be against the law for him to do what he did. A lot of people in the legislature thought it was very petty what he did beforehand. Why would you do this? It's going to become law. Or if Governor Cooper just let it go into law, he would eventually have to reinstate them. So that's, it was a situation. As she said, he had to backtrack, and he kind of had an egg on his face at that point.
I'm sure we would all love the situation where you fire someone and then you have to hire them back. It's got to be great for morale in the department.
Definitely
Right.
good company culture.
Just throw a pizza party. It'll fix everything.
Always a good idea. Always a good idea. All right, we're going to end now, and this we're chuckling, but this last bit is the tweet of the week, and it's actually not very amusing at all. Matthew Castle, who's with the Jewish Insider, brought to our attention what is a clear split within the Democratic Party in terms of support for Israel. You see the tweet right there saying the Democratic Jewish Caucus's application to become formally affiliated with the state party was rejected by the party's executive committee. A vote was 17-16, and there were 16 abstentions. So there are basically 16 people who probably would have voted no, but didn't want to have to vote no. And Teresa, you wrote a related story. You featured this tweet, but also talked about how the fact that the people who are not fans of Israel and are boosters of the Palestinians are trying to get Governor Cooper to come to their side.
Right, right. So yeah, I wrote the story yesterday that there was a group of pro-Palestinians, an alliance, as you will, sent a letter to Governor Cooper because last month when the attack on Israel happened on October 7th, a couple days later, Governor Cooper put out a statement. North Carolina stood with Israel. They lit the governor's mansion in blue to show solidarity and also to fly flags at half-staff that following weekend for an extended period. I think it was about a week or so. He put out that we stood with Israel. Well, pro-Palestinian groups were not in favor of that. They came back and said, well, what about pro-Palestinians, all the people that are Palestinians rather, getting killed over in Gaza? Those children, don't they have equal weight as Israel's children do, the citizens over in Israel? So they wanted to have a meeting with Cooper today. I'm not sure if that happened or not, but they called for a meeting with him to discuss this and other executives. But as you mentioned, there's been so much pushback against Jewish citizens and Israelis. They're all over protests the Durham Freeway, which our own David Larson got stuck in a few weeks ago trying to get home, protests blocking that. There was protests against a radio station in Charlotte, WBT. They even attacked the media. So it's a very controversial subject. It's a very sad and somber subject. But yeah, they went ahead and decided to ask Governor Cooper for an audience to talk about their side.
Yeah, very interesting. Can't be great for a political party to have this much of a division.
Absolutely not. I think I find that to be, I don't want to say amusing because I feel like that makes light of it, but I think it's a really interesting wedge that will probably play a really large part in the 2024 election, specifically with Josh Stein as one of the leading candidates.
Certainly, certainly.
Yeah.
Well, that's all the time that we have for this week's edition of The Debrief. We'll be off next week because I hope all of the panelists and I will be not working, but instead eating one of these Thanksgiving meals that's a little bit less pricey, but still pricier than we're used to. Please join us again in a couple of weeks. Like, subscribe, do all those social media things about The Debrief so we can continue to bring this program to you. And we hope you will join us again soon for another edition of The Debrief.